Hey folks, my name's Ed Travers. My pronouns are he, him, and his. I'm an Anglican priest serving in the beautiful parish of St. Margaret of Scotland that sits on the ancestral and on the unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Gwe. So as some of you know, as many of you probably know, I was away a couple of weeks ago. I went to a music festival in Fredericton, New Brunswick. Beautiful, amazing Fredericton, New Brunswick, a place where I went to university. I got to hang out with my best friend, Dennis, and I got to hang out with a new friend, Denis, and I got to hang out with people that I just met at the music festival, and I especially got to hang out with my son, who's studying at St. Thomas University. I think I'm ready to talk about the music festival a little bit. I think I'm emotionally prepared to talk about the music festival a little bit. It was amazing. It was amazing. There was lots of really great music. This band that I'm going to talk about, the song that I'm going to talk about today is Blue Rodeo. An iconic Canadian band. If you don't know who Blue Rodeo is, you need to check out Blue Rodeo. They will change your life. They will introduce you to a calm, mellow, awesome place that maybe you're in desperate need of. But there was a couple of surprises, a couple of bands that I had never heard of. One band, The War on Drugs. I had never heard of them before, and they were outstanding. They were absolutely incredible. And then there was a singer. Her name is Celise, and she's an American singer, songwriter, guitar player, amazing guitar player. She was there. Just blew me away. She was absolutely spectacular. Anyhow, you should check her out on YouTube as well. Canadians, we like our music. We like Canadian bands. Canadian bands, the really, really successful, popular Canadian bands here in Canada have a tendency to write music about being Canadian. Without ever explicitly saying, we're Canadian, their lyrics will inform you of where they come from and what they hold sacred and what they consider to be valuable and important. They'll tell you about their experiences, which are awfully similar to your own. The Tragically Hip, another great, just outstanding Canadian band. They did this very well. But Blue Rodeo is pretty outstanding. They have a song called Lost Together. Now, I've never seen Blue Rodeo live until this year, until this festival. I've always wanted to, I just never had an opportunity. I never took the opportunities that came my way. So I've never been in the room when they start playing this song. 20,000 people in this tent, downtown Fredericton, and they start singing, "And if we're lost, then we are lost together." It's that chorus that everybody knows. And everybody in that room, 20,000 voices, start screaming out those lyrics because we all want the band to hear us individually singing along with them. And we are roaring it. Everybody there is roaring it. And it sounds so stinking beautiful. You know, when I was singing, friends all around me. Tears welled up in my eyes. My jaw got tight. My throat got tight. I felt a knot in my stomach. And if we're lost, then we are lost together. And then all of a sudden I had this music festival epiphany. When are we going to get this? When are we, as Christians in particular, finally going to accept the fact, accept the teaching, accept our mission, our purpose, accept the way life is supposed to be, that we are not in this life as individuals, we are not in this life as small communities, we are in this life together. We are all, every person, everywhere, regardless of tribe, regardless of color, regardless of language, regardless of religion. We are in this together. We, as a species, are one organism, alive in this world. We must take care of each other. Paul says something incredibly similar. He's talking about the church in particular because, we are all members of one body. We're all parts of this grand body we call a church. But why isn't that teaching something that we imagine to be also outside of the church? That we are all, regardless of what we believe or where we come from, regardless of our socioeconomic demographic, the socioeconomic demographic we happen to fit into, when are we going to finally understand that we are all in this together? I'm a firm believer that the teachings of Jesus Christ, his desire to make us understand that we are called to love God by loving our neighbor, through service towards our neighbor. That we are to love God through our love of one another. That Jesus calls us to a place of unity, a place of togetherness. Now, I know there's probably going to be somebody out there who's, no. Jesus says we must hate mother, father, sister, brother. I would argue till I'm blue in the face. Now, what Jesus is saying in that kind of, when he says that kind of thing, it's not we should hate people. Because he goes on in that particular verse in Luke 14 to say, even life itself, we must hate, even this life ourself, even this life itself, if we are to become his disciples. What he's asking us to do is to reject all those things that we have learned, the ways of the world that we have absorbed, the ways of the world that we have accepted as our ways, that we identify with. He's telling us that this whole dog-eat-dog mentality that is prevalent through every culture and society to some extent or another is erroneous and destructive. That this mentality that we must look out for number one, first and foremost, is selfish and inherently ungodly. He calls us, I believe, to follow him into a life of sacrifice, into a life of giving, into a life where we look out for the people all around us, knowing full well that as we build stronger communities, as we build nations that come together, as we build a world, an international community that is looking out for every single person, regardless of how powerful, regardless of how rich, regardless of how entitled or privileged they may be. A world where we all recognize that we are indeed in this together, where I am only going to be as rich, healthy, vibrant as the poorest person. I'm only going to be as rich and healthy and vibrant as the lowest. A world where we realize that is a world where we put our efforts into taking care of others. And I think that's what Jesus is asking us to do. Create a better world by loving your neighbor. Jesus calls us to love one another, to take care of one another, to protect one another, to raise one another up, to feed each other, to clothe each other, to provide shelter for one another. He calls us to let go of that base instinct that says, you first. He calls us to be a servant of all. He tells us that the first will be last and the last will be first in the kingdom of heaven. He tells us that those who gather for themselves here have received their eternal reward. He calls us to let ourselves go for the sake of the world, for the sake of the people in the world, for the sake of creation. There's no getting through this life alone. There's no getting through this life without recognizing we are in this together. There is safety together. There is protection together. There is abundance working together. We've got to get it into our heads as church that we exist for the sake of those outside the buildings. We exist for the sake of those outside of our congregations because we're all in this together. May the Lord bless you. May the Lord keep you. May the Lord's face be made to shine upon you and be gracious to you. May the Lord's countenance be lifted up to you. May you always know the peace of being in the Lord's presence. And I pray that we can adopt this mentality, that we can live this life, fully recognizing that we are all in this together, that we will only ever be as abundant and successful as the least of us, that we will only ever be as rich and as safe as the least of us, that we will only ever be as healthy as the least of us, that we will walk through this life hand in hand with our neighbors. Amen. Nemultus.